Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another wonderful night with the Virtual Tasting Society. I'm Jane Kilkenny, and I'm subbing for Vadim Perlovsky this evening. We are pleased to welcome the Isle of Raasay with Alasdair Day and Sam Filmus. We have a few new people on the chat, so just so you know, please keep yourself muted unless you want to ask a question. Then please feel free to unmute, ask a question, throw questions in the chat, tasting notes, whatever you like. We're here to learn things and get nerdy. So with that, Alasdair, take it away.
Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm Alasdair Day, so I'm the co-founder and master distiller at Isle of Raasay Distillery. And I guess my personal connection with whiskey, I can trace back to 1820 and a company called G&A Davison. They were whiskey blenders. They had a licensed grocer shop and a brewery in Coldstream in the Scottish borders. My great-grandfather, Richard Day, joined that business in 1895, so that's exactly 130 years ago this year. He left school, I joined them as an office boy, and in 1923 he took over the company, and the company became Richard Day. Unfortunately for me, he retired after the Second World War, and that was kind of the end of that business. But in 2009, I inherited his cellar book, and it contains all of the recipes for the blends that they made from 1899 to 1916. So in 2009, I decided, when I inherited that book, I decided to recreate one of his whiskies, and it was called the Tweed Ale. And that's how I started in whiskey. And then after a few years of blending the Tweed Ale, I thought, well, you know, really need to scale this up, and really wanted to get into whiskey in a bigger way. And when I looked at the investment I would require to make the Tweed Ale whiskey a sustainable business, I realized that in a light bulb moment that actually for that amount of money I could be better building a small distillery. So I wrote a business plan to build a borders distillery, but obviously I had to raise investment to do that. And to cut a very long story short, through trying to raise the investment, I met Bill Dobby. And my first meeting with Bill, he was like, that's a great idea, and I'm really looking forward to getting into whiskey, but how about the Isle of Raasay? And I, at the time, I thought he was saying no. So I kind of went away in a kind of disappointed state. And then a few months later, realized he hadn't said no. So I went back in touch with Bill and went up to, I met Bill in November 2013, went up to Raasay with Bill in May 2014 and stood outside what was then a disused distillery. And I stood there with Bill. Didn't mean to put my camera off there. I'm just going to change my background so you can see. Stood there with Bill, looking at the view from the distillery, looking across to the Isle of Skye. And I stood there thinking, yeah, this is the place to build a distillery. So the company R&B Distillers was incorporated in July 2014, and we set about building a distillery on the Isle of Raasay, and this is what we built. So this is the distillery on the Isle of Raasay. So behind me you can see there you go, Ordale House. So this was the original Georgian house. This was where the factor, the estate manager who managed the whole of the Isle of Raasay for Clan MacLeod lived. So we restored that, and we've got 6 ensuite bedrooms there. And then you can see here we go, this bit here, this is with the gold roof. This is now our bar and shop, and then the black building at the end, that's the distillery itself. So we started distilling in September 2017. We released our first single malt in November 2020. And here we are, Isle of Raasay Distillery. So that's a kind of whirlwind tour of where we came from. And in July 2019, I'm just going to put my background off now. July 2019, we started with the Isle of Raasay gin. So this is first up tonight. And I guess I'm pretty sure we're the only distillery in Scotland that makes gin that doesn't have a gin still. So we make our gin in our spirit still on the Isle of Raasay. Actually, maybe I can get a picture of that up. So I guess when I was designing the distillery, we knew we wanted to make gin at some point. So I designed the distillery with that in mind. As I say, we don't have a gin still. Just trying to see if I can find a picture to illustrate this. Maybe don't have
no
one.
ugly Betty for you guys, Alasdair.
No ugly Betty. So we what we do is we stop whiskey distillation and we make gin for 1, maybe 2 weeks a year, and we use our spirit still. So on our spirit still, I had hoped I would have a picture that I can show you. I don't think I do. No, I don't. But yeah, so basically we use our spirit still, but off our spirit still, we've got a vapor basket. And so we put the grain neutral spirit in our spirit still. So we take that down to 60%. We put it in our spirit still, and then just before it gets to the condenser, we've got a valve that we open and it diverts it through the vapor basket, and then it comes back round and into the condenser. So we put some of the botanicals, the more hardy botanicals, go into the spirit still. So we've got the juniper and some of the roots in a big Hessian bag, like a big tea bag inside the spirit still. And then the more fragile botanicals, so the coriander, the sweet orange peel, lemon peel, go in the vapor basket. And the spirit goes through, and it lifts all of the essential oils from that. And then it goes to the condenser. Then it goes into spirit sieve, and that's how we make our gin on Raasay. So I'm just going to pour some so I can talk about it. But
so my mother is a huge fan of that.
Oh, that's cool. So it's based on a London dry gin recipe. But we have 3 additional botanicals. So if you take London dry gin, we then have rhubarb root, sweet orange peel, and lemon peel. So it's a very citrusy, zesty gin. That's how I would describe it. So when you nose it, obviously juniper forward, so you're getting all of the juniper first. But then obviously some of the spice there in the background. It's coriander. But also that sweet orange peel kind of leads, that kind of vibrant, sweet, zesty note. Yeah, so that's what we're leading with. And yeah, it makes it, as I say, kind of zesty and sweet. And the label, you can maybe see all of the botanicals are listed here on the label, so you can see all of those. The bottle is kind of very similar to our whiskey bottle, but we've got our own well on site. So for the gin and the whiskey, we use the water at all steps of the process. So for the gin, we use it to reduce the grain neutral spirit from 96 down to 60. Then obviously we do the distillation. We use the water for reduction for bottling as well. So where we are on Raasay, and I'll talk about this more when we're talking about the whiskey, but Raasay is a very small island. It's 14 miles long, it's 3 miles wide. It's actually about the same size and shape as Manhattan, but there's 161 people live on Raasay. So gives you a kind of idea of where we are. There's about 2,000 sheep for 161 people. And we now employ 40 people at the distillery. So the last census, there was about 180. The last census, 2022. So we reckon we're much closer to 200 people living on Raasay, but it's still a very kind of sparsely populated island. And to have 40 people working at the distillery is really amazing for us. But the geology of the island is really interesting. So there's a lot of volcanic rock, and where the distillery is itself, built on Jurassic sandstone. It's a really old sandstone, permeable rock, so it's like a big sponge. So our well goes down 60 meters below the distillery, and we're surrounded by volcanic rock. So when it rains, and I assure you it rains quite a lot on Raasay, so that all of that water runs off the volcanic rock and ends up in the Jurassic sandstone below the distillery. So it collects all of these minerals. There's a lot of manganese, for example, in the water, and there's a lot of minerality. So we wanted to talk about that. And that's what the bottle's about. So the bottle's actually got all of the rocks from Raasay. So the modeling clay was pushed into the rocks, and there's fossils from the East Coast. And all of this is talking about that kind of volcanic minerality that we get from the water. It's the truth. Well,
Do you know if, did you do any tests about whether or not, so I assume that caused the water to be more alkaline and changed the pH? And was that something you kind of took into account when you started, distillation and seeing how that would affect everything?
Absolutely. And it's a big part of where we are. So generally speaking, in Scotland, the water's really soft. The water's really generally more acidic. But what's interesting is that the harder the water, the more alkaline the water, the sweeter the spirit that you make. So we're not particularly hard, we're just slightly alkaline because of that volcanic rock. But yeah, it was a big part of being able to design the gin and design the whiskey. And that's why we talk about it. That's why the bottle reflects the geology so much, because we're really kind of proud of what that brings to the whiskey. And you're absolutely right. That alkalinity brings a bit more sweetness to our spirit, as well as that minerality that I was talking about. Also, I was going to say, if you look really, really closely, I don't know if this will come up on the camera, but just here, there's a little sprig of Raasay juniper. So we forage some of the juniper on Raasay, and again, that's in the glass of the bottle. I guess the thing with Raasay juniper is that it never really ripens the way the Macedonian juniper would do in that sort of climate. But it was nice just to have that kind of nod to Raasay in there as well.
Is that I was curious about, with some gins, they do local botanicals, right? So is that the main local botanical you use, or was everything from Raasay?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really difficult, as you can imagine, to grow oranges on Raasay. It's really difficult to have any of that. So that's one of the kind of ironies of making a gin, is that if you want the best botanicals with those kind of best flavors, you kind of have to go to the more Mediterranean, warmer climates to get those botanicals. So the Raasay juniper was really just a nod to the fact that there is juniper on Raasay. But being perfectly honest, it's just not sustainable to go and forage that. And one of the other things about foraging botanicals is that every time you do that, depending on the temperature, the weather, the age of the plant, it's a very variable thing. So to create what we wanted to create was a very consistent product. It doesn't really lend itself to that. So, you know, I'll talk more about what we managed to do with the whiskey and in terms of like local produce. But for a gin, to make a high quality gin, which, you know, clearly is what we're trying to do in Raasay, it's very difficult to do that with local botanicals. But we wanted to try. But in all honesty, it's just a nod to that, to get the consistency, you know, the sweet orange peel, the lemon peel, rhubarb root, all of these things, it all has to come from warmer climates to give us that consistency. Yeah, any other questions on the gin before we move on?
Alasdair, you mentioned rhubarb, which is a pretty unusual thing for having a botanical, you know, in the gin. I've heard the story that this distillery was actually built on the rhubarb field. Was it rhubarb there, like before the distillery was?
Yeah. So as I said, when we bought Borrowdale House, you know, and this is a Georgian house, you know, it's going back to Georgian times, and you know, like the whole kind of Victorian era, rhubarb was a huge thing. And I remember walking around this disused, basically it was a disused hotel when we bought it. And I was walking around with the architect, and there was literally rhubarb growing in the back of the distillery, which is not unsurprising. Like the next to Raasay House, which is an outdoor centre, has a walled garden, and the oldest part of Raasay House is Jacobean, so it goes back to kind of pre-1745, you know, like the second Jacobite rebellion in Scotland. They had a walled garden, and they used to grow all of these things. And Raasay House had this amazing walled garden where they could grow all these different things. And as I say, Borrowdale House was built at the latter part of Raasay House in the Georgian era, and it had rhubarb growing outside. And when we were designing our gin recipe, it just stuck in my mind about this rhubarb. And I thought, how amazing would it be if we could actually manage to incorporate rhubarb into our gin? The issue is that if you use the stem of rhubarb, it doesn't really give you, it didn't give us the flavors that we were looking for. So we actually used rhubarb root, and the root of the rhubarb is much more earthy. It's a kind of earthy, citrusy flavor that you get from it. So that's where we landed. But the inspiration was literally walking around this disused hotel and seeing this kind of rhubarb, and it just stuck in my mind. And when we were doing the recipe for the gin in 2019, that's where that botanical came from. So I literally rooted in that experience of walking around the distillery, and it just brings this kind of earthy citrus to the gin. So yeah, that's why we used them.
You didn't have to do anything to filter any, I don't know, does rhubarb impart much color?
Yeah, I mean, if we use the stem, yeah, very much so. But that's another reason why we went with the root. So
Okay. Otherwise, you could have had a red gin. That would have been cool.
Could have had a red gin, yeah. We're actually toying with an idea at the minute. We've got some of our gin that's actually slightly peated, it's slightly smoky, and we've just managed to get some vermouth casks, some red vermouth casks. So this is something that we're thinking about doing. It'll only be available on Raasay, unfortunately, just at the distillery if you come to the distillery. So we're going to put some of this slightly peated gin. So if you can imagine this, but with a little hint of smoke in vermouth casks to have I guess like a Negroni. So yeah, work in progress. We'll see how that goes, but it's something we might have as a distillery only purchase.
This was like the accidental batch of gin where they forgot to clean out the stills completely that you guys. Yeah, Scott was telling me about that.
How did you guess? How did you guess? Yeah.
Scott, I was there Saturday for.
Okay. So
yeah, heard from Scott.
Maybe Ross told you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Scott must have been in Southern California lately. That's what I think is happening there.
Exactly. Yep.
So there you go.
Cool.
Can I tell you anything else about the gin, or shall we move on to our single malt?
I think we're good.
Okay. So the dram. So see, we started distilling in 2017. Released our first whiskey in November 2020. It was inaugural release was slightly different from this, and we're talking about this early when we're talking about while we wait. But our single malt, okay, the dram. We knew we were going to release whiskey at 3 years old, and I guess it's more unusual in Scotland to release something at a younger age. I mean, in Scotland, it's got to be a minimum of 3 years in an oak cask before it's actually Scotch whiskey. So when we're designing the distillery, we kind of work out how on earth were we going to release an excellent whiskey at 3 years old and meeting all of the Scotch whiskey regulations. So what we do is we use 6 months of plain unpeated malted barley and 6 months of peated malted barley. And the peated malted barley comes in about 52 parts per million, so it's quite heavily peated. So you've got two different spirits straight away, unpeated and peated. And we do slightly different cut points for both. So on the spirit still, we come on to spirit about 72% ABV. And then for our plain malted barley, we come off at 67. And for our peated, we come off at 65. So it's a pretty narrow cut on both. And that's because we wanted to produce a lightly peated spirit. And when I was designing the distillery, we worked with a company of chemical engineers called Allen Associates. And the first thing they said to me is, what style of spirit do you want to make? And I said, elegant. And they said, well, what is that? It's like, what's elegant? And I said, and I was going, well, like Balvenie, Cahuilla, those kind of spirits to me are really elegant. And we'll come back to that in a minute, but that's why we take narrow cuts, because that's the kind of style of spirit we're looking for. But we also designed the distillery to have a number of things that could be off or on. I wanted to have as much flexibility as possible, so we looked at a lot of other distilleries around the world. So if you think back to kind of 2015, what was happening in the world, so there's a kind of huge boom in the US of craft distilling and smaller distilleries doing different things, particularly making rye whiskey cool again, which really kind of stuck with me, and Japanese whiskey being really, really, really cool, really popular. So I was thinking, what are these guys doing in other places? In particular in Japan, for me, being a Scot, for me, the Japanese really studied single malt Scotch whiskey. They took it to Japan, they made it better. They made really good whiskey. And I just thought, what if we could bring some of these elements from kind of really cool US rye whiskey, Japanese whiskey? How do we bring that back to Scotland? How do we look at what people have studied in Scotland and made better and bring it back? And one of the things that really stood out for me was this kind of flexibility and being able to make different styles of spirit in the same distillery. So that, I thought, how do you do that? So when I was kind of designing the process, I thought, well, we need to have things that can be off or on. So for example, on our washbacks, we've got cooling jackets in the washbacks, and they can be off or on. And what that does is we don't control the temperature of fermentation, but we can cap the temperature of fermentation. So when we're on our unpeated malt, we stop the fermentation at 32 degrees C. And when we're on peated malted barley, we let it go as high as it wants to go. So it'll go 35, 36. And what does that do? Well, basically, the higher the fermentation temperature, the more fusel oils you get, the more higher alcohols you get. So you get a more kind of heavier, oilier, viscous wash. But by capping the fermentation temperature at 32 degrees C, we get a slightly lighter, slightly less oilier. So this is building into being able to produce these two different spirit characters and playing with the mouthfeel and the viscosity of that during fermentation. And then in the wash still, we've got a cooling jacket on the liner of the wash still. And it's always on. So it's what that does is the vapors come over the top. So it's a slightly declined line arm on the wash still. So we've got a lantern neck on the wash still. So we get a bit of expansion at the lantern neck. Obviously, as soon as you get expansion, you get a bit of cooling, and then the spirit returns to the pot. So you get a bit of extra reflux there. But we've got a cooling jacket on the line arm, so that comes over it, and all of the heavier vapors condense early. And basically, we've got a hand valve that can be open or closed. If it's open, the vapors return to the pot still. And it's a little bit counterintuitive, because most people say to me, well, that means that that hand valve's open and the spirit's returning to the pot still, you're getting more copper contact. But it doesn't really work like that. What happens is we tend to concentrate the heavier vapors, the heavier volatiles back into the still. And because it's a wash still and we're not taking a cut and we distill right down to pretty much water, eventually all of these heavier volatiles come over. So by opening that hand valve and by having that cooling jacket, we actually concentrate the more heavier alcohols, the higher alcohols, the fusel oils, and that gives us a much more viscous, heavier low wines. And then on the spirit still, as I was saying with the gin, we've got a valve that diverts it to the vapor basket, where we've got two valves. The second valve diverts it to a little column. It's like a column with 6 copper plates, bubble cap plates. And I think for me, Dave Broom, I've spoken to a lot of people about this, and Dave Broom summed it up, and he basically said, so what you're saying, Alasdair, is if you took that column and you put it where the swan neck is, you would have a Carter head still. And I was like, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So by opening and closing this valve, we can create a third still. So our wash still is a swan neck still with a slightly inclined line arm. If we open the valve, it goes through this little purifier, this little column, and it turned into a Carter head still. So we get a much lighter spirit, and it's very much focused on this kind of black curranty note that we get from our spirit. So that's the things that can be off or on. And then on top of that, we do 3 and 5 day fermentations. So the different fermentations give us different characteristics in the wash. So 3 days, the reason we do 3 day fermentations, when you think about it, pretty much all of the alcohol we're going to get from fermentation comes within 48 hours. So if you look at, like pick a big name in the whiskey industry. So someone like Macallan would do 52-hour fermentation. So 52 hours gives you all the alcohol you're going to get. But again, for us, for Raasay, the style that we're trying to make, we wanted more than that. And after 70 hours, the yeast starts to die off. And when the yeast dies off, those yeast cells burst open. It's a process called lysis. And lysis gives you this much more kind of buttery, oily mouthfeel. So by doing a minimum of 3-day fermentations, we get this lysis. So that gives us just a little bit more richness, a little more character to our wash. But then if the yeast died off, why do we continue to ferment for 5 days? Well, basically, we then move into lactobacillus development, so to lactic fermentation. And lactobacillus, for me, is really fascinating. So before I moved into the whiskey industry, before I recreated my great-grandfather's blended whiskey, I worked in the dairy industry, and obviously lactobacillus is really big in dairy. And it's here in Scotland, people talk about the friendly bacteria, and that's what lactobacillus is. But in whiskey, lactobacillus comes from the malted barley. So the malted barley, if you imagine malted barley, is like just coated in lactobacillus, and it comes in, and there's hundreds of different types of lactobacillus, but very few of them can survive the temperatures at mashing. So for a lot of years, and I was talking about lactobacillus development, there's been that kind of 3 and 5 days where we get lactobacillus development. And eventually I thought, we really need to get some analysis done on this. So we worked with a university that did some work for us, and they actually identified 9 different types of lactobacillus in our wash. And what's really fascinating is that period between 3 and 5 days, you can see the populations of the different lactobacillus changing. That's telling you that it's different things happening and different flavors being produced. So what does that give us? Well, lactobacillus produces lactic acid. Lactic acid reacts with the esters that the yeast have already produced, and you get longer chain esters. It also reduces the pH of the wash, and the lower the pH, the better the interaction with the copper of the stills. So copper's a catalyst. Copper removes impurities, particularly sulfurs and sulfites and sulfates. So by having a lower pH, that we get a better catalytic reaction in the still. So that's why we do 3 and 5 day fermentations. It gives us more of those dark fruit flavors that we're looking for. And it also brings us back to that kind of elegant spirit that we're trying to produce. Anyway, I'm talking way too much, so let's pour some of this and talk more about the whiskey. So as I was saying, that whole conversation started from we were gonna produce a young whiskey, and how do you produce an excellent young whiskey at 3 years old. So if you don't create the flavors in fermentation, you can't distill them. So that's why I was talking so much there about the fermentations. But
so are you saying this, let me see now, the Hebridean single malt that's a 3-year-old whiskey?
Yeah, so this whiskey that we're drinking now is kind of like more in the kind of 4 or 5 years old, but it's young. It's young, and we knew we were always going to release it. So our very first release back in June 21, all of the components were 3 years old. Now we've been distilling for a bit longer. You're kind of between 3 and 5 years old for all of the components in it. So we've got
it does not. I mean, the taste doesn't indicate that it's a young whiskey. I mean, this is fabulous.
No, I'm very happy. I'm very happy because that's really what we set out to do. And as well as the 2 different spirits, the peated and unpeated spirit, that are completely matured separately. So we do 6 months peated, 6 months unpeated, matured separately. We use 3 different types of casks. So you can maybe see here on the label, I maybe move that in a bit. We've got these little icons of 6 casks. So we use X rye casks. So these are casks that have had rye whiskey in them before, and initially it was Woodford Reserve rye, latterly Sagamore rye. We've also used some Jim Beam rye casks, and that's because we wanted to use the North American oak, the Quercus alba. Obviously, bourbon casks, everybody knows, in Scotch whisky brings that vanilla and butterscotch. But what rye brings is that kind of peppery, spicy note. So that's why we use rye casks over bourbon casks, because it just brings that other element. And, you know, for me, to make a excellent whiskey, you need to have complexity, depth, and balance. So the complexity comes from everything I've talked about: the fermentation, 2 different spirit types, 3 different cask types, the X rye. So that rye brings that kind of peppery note. But we also use Chinkapin oak, so Quercus muhlenbergi. It's also a North American oak. Grows everywhere that Quercus alba grows, and it never used to be separated out. You know, so there'll be bourbon barrels from years ago that would be Quercus alba and Quercus muhlenbergi together. But when you separate it out, Quercus muhlenbergi brings a very different flavour to the whiskey. So it doesn't give you that classic vanilla butterscotch that you get from Quercus alba. Quercus muhlenbergi, the Chinkapin oak, brings a much richer, for me, more dark fruits to it. And then the third cask type we use is ex-Bordeaux red wine. So obviously, the Bordeaux wine, the chateaus that we work with, they're all left bank in Bordeaux. So left bank is predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon, so a much heavier, higher tannin wine. The barriques that we use have all been used for 3 vintages of wine. Most of the chateaus we work with are within the Margaux region, predominantly Raison Saglan is the chateau that we work with, but we've also worked with Chateau Parma. We've got some Chateau Margaux casks, so really, really high quality Bordeaux casks. And what that brings is so it's French oak. So the French oak is a mixture of Quercus patria and Quercus roba, and that brings much more savoury spice to it. So you get much more kind of, you know, cloves. Quercus patria in particular is a lot of eugenol, so that's where the kind of clove elements come from. Quercus roba is very different. It's more like almost kind of like a freeze-dried raspberry fruit thing that it brings. But then you've got the Bordeaux wine itself, so these kind of dark fruit elements. And so by using peated and unpeated spirit and 3 different cask types, that's how we build the complexity and get the depth. And then the balance comes from all of these things being matured separately, and then after maturation vatted together, and that's how we create the balance. So it's a very long way of saying this is our the dram. This is our single malt from Raasay, bottled at 46.4%. It's lightly peated because we've got peated and unpeated vatted together.
Is the go ahead. I was just going to ask if the Chinkapin oak, because obviously the X rye has been used, the X Bordeaux has been used. Is the Chinkapin oak also, it's virgin?
It is virgin, fresh cask, and it's made to our specifications. So we ask that the timber is air dried for 36 months. So it's a 3-year air drying, then a high toast and a high char. And the reason for that is that the longer the air drying,
yep,
the more the lignin in the oak breaks down. So if you were to take the dry matter of oak, 52% of the dry matter of oak is lignin. So lignin is a huge part of what makes plants strong. It's in all of the cell walls. But when lignin breaks down, so the air drying is all about, so most people like think about drying it as about moisture content. So to a certain extent it is moisture content, but for me, the reason we want these longer air dryings is that we want the lignins to start to degrade, to break down. Because when lignin breaks down, it turns into volatile phenols. And if you can create the volatile phenols in the oak. Obviously, when you use peated malted barley, as soon as you've distilled that, those phenols start to break down, they start to degrade. So at some point in the future, if you can start to get the volatile phenols back from the oak, then in time you'll balance out what you're losing from the peated spirit. But also toasting, the toasting of the oak, it does two things. It caramelizes the hemicellulose, the natural sugars in the oak, so you get more caramelization, you get more of that caramel. But it also, the toasting also breaks down the lignins as well. So that's why we go for a high toast. And then the high char obviously creates the charcoal, and the charcoal actually removes some of the impurity from the spirit. So that's why the Chinkapin oak and the fact that these are fresh oak casks, virgin oak casks made to our specification, they do a huge amount to bring, the charcoal removing impurities, the lignins breaking down the volatile phenols, they bring a huge amount to it. So the oak species in itself, but also how the cask is created. So yeah, the Chinkapin's a big part of the 6 cask recipe that we talk about. And
was the air drying also, is that a chance for it? From what I understood and what I read sometime, is that also helps introduce like the bacteria or lactobacillus by having it sitting out there, and it permeates into the wood, and then that gets used and something
yeah,
too.
yeah. I mean, it's there as well. I mean, I personally think that it's more about the lactobacillus coming in on the malted barley. That's the important thing. And then I think over time, the longer the distillery exists, the more that natural bacterial flora will exist in the distillery. But from day one, it's like, how do you have that from day one? And that was always a big kind of dilemma. And so, yes, I think you're absolutely right. So by doing the longer air drying on the oak, by doing the longer fermentations, that's how we were able to create that environment from day one. And what is, we're all stainless steel, so we don't have any wooden washback. So how do you create that from day one? And that's how we created it from day one. So you have to create that, and then you can maintain it going forward. Yeah. Anyway, the whiskey, here we go. So yeah, hopefully on this, little bit of that peaty smoke in the nose, and yeah, and I note some comments in the black pepper. That's the black pepper is a big thing for us because it's a dimension that a lot of Scotch whiskey doesn't have in it, and for me, the rye casks really bring that. And also that dark fruit, yeah, definitely black cherries. That black cherries is definitely something that we're looking for. And that, yeah, and as I say, there's a sweetness there. The sweetness comes from our new make, and I think, as we said earlier, a lot of that comes from some water itself. That kind of having that slight alkalinity to the water, the minerality that we get from the volcanic rock is definitely there. And yeah, so initially we set out to make a lightly peated whiskey with dark fruits, and using all of those elements, fermentation, the 2 different spirit types, the 3 different cask types. Hopefully that's bringing that all together.
It's really nice.
Happy to get
the minerality really does come through, especially at the front.
Yeah.
If that sweetness comes, because I was assuming some of the sweetness was from that lightly peated from the used casks, but if it's coming from the minerality, I mean, your white dog must be fun.
I mean, the new make spirit it's remarkably sweet in a very kind of dark fruit sort of way. There's a lot of sweetness in the new make, and it's like you have to have you have to have it in the new make, don't you? You have to have it. You have to have all of that there in the new make.
Start with something good.
Yeah,
I told Scott to bring some with him next time so we can try it.
Yeah. He hasn't asked me yet, but we'll see what we can sort out.
I'll sort him straight for the next time he comes back out, because I'm always asking for new make.
No, definitely. And some of the other things that's really interesting, we used some different barley varieties and some different yeasts, and that in the new make, when you try that in the new make, it's amazing the difference it makes. So we used some bear barley. The bear's really kind of an ancient land race. I think it's been in the Hebridean Islands of Scotland for 2,500 years, something like that. It's just it started off in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East and moved with people. It was 10,000 years ago, and it moved with people and eventually ended up in the Orkney Islands and then came down the west coast. And it really brings a completely different flavour to the whiskey. And we've used some champagne yeast as well, and the champagne yeast really brings a lot more of that dark fruit flavour, but a kind of biscuity note as well. So yeah, when you're tasting a new make, you can get all of these elements. You can see different barley variety, different yeast variety. You can get all of that in a new make spirit.
Could you test different, like regular kind of yeast strains, or actually, I know there was some talk in some recent ones I did about people using brewer's yeast instead of distiller's yeast because there's actually some benefits to brewer's yeast.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think it's like all these things. It's like barley varieties, yeast varieties. Over time, I guess if you're a 200-year-old distillery, right, you're focused on cost. Right? You're a very, very, very mature business, and when you're a very mature business, it comes down to your production costs and efficiency. So yeasts get developed, the distiller's yeast get developed to produce the highest amount of alcohol.
Right.
But barley varieties are developed to give the farmer the highest weight, the highest yield from the field, and the distiller the highest alcohol yield. So all of these things are true. But what's really interesting is when you step away from that and you use, as you say, historically in Scotland, brewer's yeast would have been used, and different barley varieties would have been used, and so we've done small amounts of all of that because I think it gets really interesting when you get into flavour development. So we've used bear barley, which is a historic variety. We've used some organic barley variety from the Orkney Islands. Also, geographically, the barley where the barley grows makes a really interesting difference. We worked with Arbiki Distillery, so Arbiki grew some barley for us, and it was a commercial barley variety, but you can actually taste the difference between that and where it's grown in different places. We've also grown some barley down in Campbelltown. So we've got these regional things, we've got varietal things, which is really interesting. And we've used so the brewer's yeast we've used was actually spent brewer's yeast. And this is quite cool because the yeast has done its job, right? So it's made the beer, and then it was really working with the Thompson brothers at Dorn Distillery, and they were going, well, look, what used to happen is like distillers in rural Scotland would bring spent brewer's yeast up, and they would use that, and it wasn't so much about fermenting; it was more about, as I was saying, it's more about that lysis, that kind of thing where it's done. So you're adding spent brewer's yeast as a flavor element. It's like really fascinating. So we each year we've done a kind of collaboration with the Thompson brothers, and so we've got some interesting heritage varieties. We've got spent brewer's yeast. We've got 3.5 week fermentations. It's all there as a kind of out there. But what's interesting is what that brings to the depth of flavor that you can create by doing these things. It's probably right in saying it's not necessarily commercially viable, but it's really interesting to do these things, and it's in years to come, it will be fascinating to release these things.
3.5 week fermentation.
3.5 week fermentation. Yeah, it was over Christmas, so we did we put the distillers yeast and the spent brewers yeast in before Christmas, and then we shut down. Everyone went away, had holidays, all great, and then we came back and did the distillation 3.5 weeks later. So,
What was that like?
Funky, interesting. Yeah, it's yeah. There'll be something in years to come. You'll find out. But yeah, it's great to do these things. Also, we've grown some barley on Raasay. So in 2017, 2018, 2019, we ran barley variety trials to try and find a variety that would go in Raasay. Now, so I've said already, Raasay is really wet. So we can only grow barley from May until August on Raasay. But at commercial varieties, these days you drill in March and you harvest in October. And as I was saying earlier, that the whole thing about yield, these modern day commercial barley varieties have been bred to maximize yield, but that extends the growing season as well. So it was a bit of a dilemma. So we're like, wanted to have local barley. We wanted to have barley grown on Raasay, and how are we going to do this? So we had to find a variety that would actually grow between May and August. So we worked with a guy called Peter Martin. So he was the head of agriculture at the Alasdair University, and he worked with Bruichladdich with beer barley. So it was Peter that created that whole beer barley thing for Bruichladdich. So I was talking to Peter, and he said, well, yeah, beer will probably work, and it would have been beer barley. So we talk about being the first legal distillery on the Isle of Raasay, but there was a lot of distilling on Raasay before we ever existed, and so a lot of illicit distilling, and you can go to different places in Raasay and you can see where the stills would have been, and they would have used beer barley because that's what grew. That was the heritage variety that grew in Raasay. So we grew beer, but then we grew two other varieties. We grew Iskria. Iskria grows inside the Arctic Circle in Iceland, and Braga, which goes inside the Arctic Circle in Norway. And it's so cold there that they can only plant in May and they harvest in August. So clearly, those two varieties grew very well on Raasay. So we've got 3 years of these trials, and it went really well. We harvested it, we malted it, and we've distilled it. So I think we've got a grand total of about 9 casks of Raasay barley. So some point in the future, there will be 100% Raasay barley releases, but they might be eye-wateringly expensive. I'm sure you can imagine how that was. But the whole idea of that is that there's no infrastructure, no agriculture infrastructure on Raasay or anywhere in the Hebrides.
It's also very hilly too, I heard, and you don't have a combine, and there was a whole thing there, right?
Yeah, there's a whole thing about the combine. So we brought the combine down from Orkney. So
Yep.
On Orkney, they converted a Volkswagen camper van into a combine, and we went up with a trailer and we brought it down, and we found out that it would only combine down the hill. We couldn't
Down the hill.
combine up the hill. So and then we got it all into bags, and we were all jumping up and down going, yay, this is great. And then realized that actually we were going to have to dry it, and we had to dry it within 24 hours. So we sent it down to the Hutton Institute in Dundee, who dried it and cleaned it for us. And then we're like, yay. And they're like, oh no, we have to malt it now. So we got a guy called Hugh Martin, who's like a malting nerd, and built his own maltings. It's like 25 kilo batches. So we got it all malted with some Raasay peat and everything. But it was like, yeah, nuts, crazy stuff. But yeah, we managed it.
Probably move to the next one as I post in the chat. Otherwise, I'll just keep asking questions and we'll never finish.
Yeah, let's go. Okay, so next whiskey, Dunkana. Okay, here we go. Dunkana. So Dunkana is the highest point on Raasay. And this is an annual release that we do. Looks quite different, which is quite nice. And you've got a little image of Dunkana on the side. So this is based on our rye cask. So initially matured in rye cask, so it's peated and unpeated spirit matured in rye cask. And then with this, it's vatted, and a second maturation in Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez quarter casks. And then it's vatted again and brings it back. And you can see straight away, you can see the color difference straight away. And that's all coming from the sherry cask. And that's what we're kind of leaning into here. So I think this is about really bringing that dry nuttiness from the Oloroso and the kind of really sweet raisiny elements from the Pedro Jimenez cask as well. Hopefully a big step change.
This one I assume was proofed down a bit, right?
Yeah. I mean, the sherry really mutes the peat. Definitely mutes the peat. But what it does do is it's richer. It's a little bit heavier, and really it's all about that kind of fruit.
I love how delicate the sherry touch is, because it's a completely different animal than the previous one, but it's not sherry. I'm not drinking one of these, sherry bombs. It has changed the underlying spirit and brought out nuance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I think there's two things there. Is that the quarter casks are Quercus alba, a North American oak. They're seasoned with Oloroso and they're seasoned with Pedro Jimenez. So that in itself, if this was Spanish oak, this was Quercus alba, and it was all Oloroso, then exactly what you said there, Jason. There you'd be absolute full-on cherry bomb. It's not what we're looking for. It's not kind of really Raasay. We kind of want just what you said. We still want you to be able to taste the distillery character, but then that sherry element just kind of complementing what's already there.
Well, Alasdair, the first smell I took of it, I was like, I want a barrel and I'm going to bathe in it. The nose is just gorgeous. It's like, oh, take me away.
Yeah, I have to say that the Dunkana has won more awards than any other of our Raasay whiskies, and I think it's just, hopefully, it's, as I said earlier, it's about the balance. It's being able to balance the spirit, and hopefully the quarter cask, both the Oloroso and the Pedro Jimenez and the Quercus alba, are complementing what's already there and enhancing it. But yeah, I love that. That's a great description. Dark chocolate covered with cherry. Yeah, love it. Yeah. And this is something that is ongoing. It's an annual release. So we actually vatted and filled quarter casks in December last year that will be vatted and bottled in September this year. So it's a kind of ongoing long-term thing. So,
Alasdair, the Hebridean lightly peated is bottled at 46.4.
yeah.
This one, Duncan, is bottled at 52. How do you make this kind of decisions?
So again, the view I always take is alcohol is flavor. You know, like alcohol in itself brings flavor to the whiskey, but what we're, I guess, very cognizant of is that it goes back to this thing about balance. So if you've got something like this, which is a lot richer, potentially heavy whiskey, we want to bottle it at a strength that actually complements the other elements. And we just found that. So yeah, so this is 46.4, and that works well for us for the dram. But 52, I think, is a better strength. The alcohol works and enhances the flavors that you're getting from the sherry cask. So it's really based on that. So we did a Colombian oak release that we did at 50.7, and again, that was because when we tried all of the different dilutions, we just found that that's the strength that worked best for that. Yeah, so ultimately it's about balance. It's about trying to balance the alcohol itself with the flavors and the palate that's in the whiskey.
So one thing I'd been noticing was with alcohol content, I've got like, I'll follow up with the question later, but I was curious if you had done any tests or your kind of thoughts about how tannins, right? Some more tannins present in whiskey, either due to wood or the particular finish, can replicate kind of more higher alcohol like ABV or something, or is that a thing you've noticed? And when you talk about balance, you try and balance for?
It's something we'll talk about in the next dram. In fact, actually, why don't, if everyone's ready, we'll move on to that. So we've got the unpeated ex Bordeaux next, and this is a really good example of tannins. Because you know, one of the things a lot of people said to me is like, okay, so you're going to use ex Bordeaux casks, so like wine casks. The wine itself is really high in tannins, but then you've chosen to work with left bank Bordeaux, like Cabernet Sauvignon is really all about tannin. It's really all about tannins. So it's interesting because you've got the tannins from the oak, you've got the tannins from the wine, and really, yeah, we could be in a really difficult space, I think. But if we pour this and try it and talk about it, I think you'll see how it works, hopefully. Yeah. Just making sure I pour myself the right one here.
And on that note, since we're talking about ABV and tannins, since it's 61.9%,
yeah,
you know, the eternal question, do you think that it should be drunk at 61.9, or do you feel like you need a little bit of water or a certain water? Would you proof it down to a certain percentage usually? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so this was done as part of our Nicaea range. So spoke earlier about the fact that we've got a 6 cask recipe, and 6 in Gaelic is Sia, so Nicaea means the 6. And what we wanted to do here is literally just showcase, or turn it around the other way, deconstruct our single malt into its 6 component parts. So the purest way of doing that is to do it at cask strength. But absolutely, for me, I would always bring it down in alcohol strength. And it's just exactly what I was saying earlier. There will be a level of dilution that works perfectly, but it's really hard to kind of put something in front of everybody and go, well, this is, you know, this is Nicaea, this is a component part of our single malt, and not do it at cask strength, because ultimately you need to get that component. You need to be able to get into what it actually is. But so I would always as most people would do, advocate that you try this as it is straight from the cask. But ultimately, if you're going to sit and sip it and drink it, add the water till you get to the point where you think that's where it's working. And just exactly the same question that Sam asked. It's like, how do you know what strength to bottle at? Well, you have to do lots of different dilutions, and you have to have a panel, and you have to taste it, and that you will land on this strength that you want to drink it at. And it will be different. You know, the nice thing about this is going to be different from everybody drinking it. Everyone's palate's different. So, you know, you can work on that. So by doing this, it allows everyone to work that out for themselves. And,
You give us the choice instead of deciding for us, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Slash. Yeah, so with this straight away on the palate, it's, to me, you just get all of that French oak. So really driven by so the French oak is a mixture of Quercus petraea and Quercus oler. Quercus petraea is like really high in eugenol, so cloves for me. You get that straight away, and in this you get that straight away. So back to that whole thing about tannins, it's not just about the tannins. So you've got our new make spirit, you've got a cask that's been used for 3 vintages of Bordeaux wine. You've got the oak species that the cask is made from that's driving that. So what leads in this is the savoury spice, the cloves. And what's interesting as well is the colour. It's a kind of autumnal gold. So when it first goes into the wine cask, if you were to take the spirit out after 3 months, it would be blush pink. It would just be blush pink. And it takes 18 to 24 months to get past the wine and into the oak. And that's really what this is about. This is about full-term maturation in ex-Bordeaux wine cask. So I guess wine casks can get a really bad name or a bad rap, and that really comes from finishing. So if you finish a whiskey in Bordeaux wine cask, particularly left bank, high tannin, Cabernet Sauvignon driven wines, you end up with a kind of strawberry jam thing. It's just a bit, well, jammy, a bit over fruited, a bit out of balance. So I always stress that this is fully matured in ex-Bordeaux red wine cask. And again, it's about balance. So you want the wine influence, but you need to get past the wines. You need to get past that 3-4 mil into the cask, the 3 vintages of given, and then draw those tannins and the eugenol and all these flavors from the French oak that then balances those kind of really red, jammy fruit flavors. And hopefully that's where you're getting here. You're getting a balance from the oak, and you're getting a balance from the red wine, and hopefully our new maker distillery character is still coming through as well. Anything else, or any other questions I can talk about the Bordeaux?
Since we don't have that sample, how does the peat change how that French oak, the tannins, start expressing themselves? Because you make that one too.
Yeah. So the peat's very different. The peat changes it completely. And for me, our peated spirit in the Bordeaux cask brings a real briny, salty element to it. So obviously we are an island off an island in the Hebrides of Scotland, and everyone expects a kind of real maritime note to the whiskey. But the one cask that really drives that for me is our peated spirit in the Bordeaux cask. You just get this real salty, briny element to it, and that's what's fascinating, is like just how the spirit in the cask works, and you get these elements that you wouldn't necessarily expect. But yeah, that's what it brings.
Was that just reactivity from the phenols with some of the other chemical compounds that are present that express that then?
I think it's really good. I mean, I get into, and I really love getting into all the chemistry and being able to kind of work out all the chemicals. But ultimately, let's be honest, our palates aren't like that. You know, we're not kind of really analog beings, are we? It's all about how things hang together ultimately. And so yeah, it's about all these different things that are going on, but ultimately when we taste it, it's what our taste receptors get at the end of the day. And I think that's why I'm so fascinated by peated spirit and ex Bordeaux cask, because it just, you're like, where the hell does this salty thing come from? You know, like try and explain that in chemistry. It's like, and I'm not going to try, but when you taste it, that's what you'll get.
Can you do it after the tasting is over for the geeky chemical engineers sitting in the room?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. I'm here for that.
Right, we'll move on swiftly because I'm just conscious I'm talking an awful lot. So grab myself another glass and we'll do so this is the unpeated X-Rye. So this for me was something that I really wanted to do, because like in Scotland for years everyone was just like you know, bourbon, sherry, bourbon, sherry, bourbon, sherry, bourbon, sherry. It was almost like you got to the point where it's like, no. Like so when we were, I just went like, what can we do that brings a bit more to it than just bourbon? And I'm not knocking bourbon. I love bourbon. I am a bourbon drinker. Love it. But it was, what can we bring? What complexity can we bring to our Isle of Raasay whiskey? And for me, it was the rye. And just that peppery, spicy element just lifts it. I think it just enhances it. And yeah, you get the spice, you get that black pepper, but it's immediately right in behind that kind of black pepper spice comes the sweetness, the butterscotch, the vanilla. It's all there, and that's really what we're looking for, just to have that complexity. It could just that additional level, that additional depth, and that's what I think using X-Rye cask brings. So yeah, I don't know if there was.
The rye currently, I think you said, is pretty much everything we're tasting is currently just going to be Woodford, because Sagamore is a very different spirit, a different tasting spirit. So I would expect when the Sagamore rye gets mixed in, you're going to get a different flavor profile, right?
Yeah. I mean, the Sagamore is fascinating because it's like 52 and 90% rye. So we've got those two different levels of rye. We've also got some wave stave casks. We've got some of their sherry casks. It's just a really interesting balance. And when I say Woodford Reserve, it's the actual casks are Early Times and Old Watermill rye. So not actually Woodford Reserve rye itself, but the brands that bring a bit more. So the Early Times casks that we've used are really interesting, as are the Old Watermill. So they're a little bit more out there than just Woodford itself.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting to know. All right, cool.
But yeah, absolutely. Can't wait till we start drawing some of the Sagamore casks and be interesting stuff. We've also got some Jim Beam rye as well. It's interesting too. Okay, any other thoughts on?
Do you find that As Scotch distilleries start using rye casks more, that they are going to get much more specific and nerdy about the rye that was in it previously than they say do with bourbon casks. Because bourbon casks, you
Yeah,
just go, it's a bourbon cask, I'm fine. And rye is so different from rye to rye. Like
yeah,
you could make some really weird barrels if you just specified rye.
yeah. No, I absolutely, absolutely that, and I'd love to see it happen. Personally, I'm not seeing it happen in Scotland. I think
I like
we
that.
are we're one of the few. We're really like, I do think we're one of the few. I don't know many other people that are in Scotland that are using rye cask, and I think it's a shame. I also get really upset when people just go, "It's a bourbon cask, it's the next bourbon cask," because
Yeah.
I'm like, so who's bourbon? You know, tell me about the bourbon, and then
They're
I'm
not the
also
same.
like, tell me about the oak species. Is it just Quercus alba, or like, is it Gariana, or is it, you know, what's the oak? What's been in it? And I I guess we're so tied up in wrath. Like we want to be really, and I hope we are really transparent. We want to just be able to go, this is what we're doing. If you go onto our website and you look up, you know, you stick the whatever it is in, and you look up that release, and hopefully it'll tell you the cut points and the yeast and everything, right? That's what I want to know. I like, you know, if we buy casks, I want to know, well, what rye, just exactly what you said. What rye is it? Like the Sagamore, is it 52? Is it 90%? It's like, what yeast did you use? Oh, wave staves, you know, like I get so disappointed when we go, oh yeah, it's a sherry cask.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's okay. Is it American? Was it American oak? Is it Spanish oak? Is it French oak? Is it like what sherry? Which Bodega? Is it Oloroso? Is it Amontillado? What is it? You know, and I think these are the things that make the difference. So absolutely. Sorry, I'm off on one. But yeah, rye. I would love to see people use rye, and we are trying to get hold of more rye casks. And honestly, if you know any rye distilleries that would send us rye casks, please connect me, because I just think there's a whole thing there. And just, you know, look what's happening in the US. You know, look at some of the Texas whiskeys that are going on, and there's like, I just had an Andalusian chocolate malt the other day, and it's like, whoa, you know, that's just, you know, anyway, there's like, this is what's interesting. And then if for us, you know, we are bound by the Scotch whisky regulations, but being, you know, all these things that you can do, it's just fascinating. So yeah,
So
absolutely. I would
we're
love to see people.
oh, I apologize. We're the amateurs of the group, but this was kind of a surprise for us.
Right.
And you know, it's got, you know, you know, this, you know, kind of a little smokiness, a little peppery, but I can't really describe it any other way, but it just had a clean kind of purity to it. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes sense, because that's my elegant. That's you've just summed up what we're trying to make. Yeah.
Oh, okay. First try. First try.
First try. Absolutely nail on the head there. Well, yeah, and that is the style of spirit we're trying to make. Exactly that.
Awesome. No, put it this way, from an untrained palate, that's exactly what came through for us. And
See, everyone's an
delighted.
expert. Yeah,
That's
no,
really
seriously, that's what it's about. And you know, if you're enjoying it, I'm delighted.
Oh, very much so. I'd say the gin was amazing. Duncana was really good. Which is not a very descriptive right. But you know, the ex-Bordeaux, that was kind of peppery and deep, dark, fruity flavors with kind of a clovey undertone to it.
Yeah.
And then the rye, which was a surprise. It was, I mean, you know, like I said, it can't really describe it anything other than it just had a certain purity to it, like a certain cleanness to it. It
Yeah.
was very nice.
I love that description of clean, because I think for me, when we're making our new make spirit, you know, I say elegant, but it's about that clean. It's about no faults. Clean is a great description of what we're trying to make.
Yeah, it
Really like
wasn't
that.
like a crowded flavor. Do you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, it had like a singularity to it.
So, Glenn, are you a rye drinker kind of on a daily basis, so to speak, or is that something you don't drink a lot of?
Actually, we're completely untrained. Like, we just like whiskey, and
Hey, nothing wrong with that.
that's it. I mean, I was
Yeah.
inspired enough. I was inspired enough to. I have a very deep connection to Japan through like marriage, and I lived there for many, many years and things like that. So I actually started with Japanese whiskeys.
Gotcha.
And you know, even when they were terrible, like back in the 1980s, right? Right. And but you know, we've kind of graduated to really enjoying them from all over the place. And I love it when like a client gives me a you know, a special bottle of something that, you know, we've never had before. Like I did some pro bono work for a client of mine, and he gave me a bottle of Nika 21, right? You know, and since I go to Japan, you know, at least 2, sometimes 3 times a year, um, you know, I've taken time to visit distilleries and things like that. But next trip, Scotland. Right.
Alasdair on Raasay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's a trek, but it's worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, just think, Glenn, you guys got 2 more to go.
Oh yeah, no, we're excited. So anyway, I'm gonna put myself on mute because I will dominate the conversation.
Okay, we'll do the peated chinkapin next then, because yeah, this is also what it's all about as well. So
Oh, and Alasdair, both Jason and I, like I know GW Kent, Willett, and Rocktown all have rye barrels for sale, and Jason mentioned Mammoth Distilling, and
oh yeah,
that is a
cool.
really good rye.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you can connect me, I'll be
Yeah.
very happy. Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, so Chinkapin Oak, Quercus Muhlenberg. This for me was the linchpin of being able to make an excellent Scotch whiskey at a young age. The Chinkapin is what pulls it all together. And I haven't really spoken about it, but I have said that we do peated and unpeated. I have said that we have 3 different cask types, so and ultimately 6 different casks. And the proportions of how we bring it together. So you know, this is deconstructing it by having the rye and the Bordeaux and the Chinkapin, but it's about 60% rye, and then you're kind of in the sort of 25% Chinkapin, and then 15% Bordeaux. So the Chinkapin's a big part of it. This is the glue that holds the Isle of Raasay single malt together. This is really what it's all about.
I gotta say, when we did the tasting Saturday, and I thought I'd heard about Mosewood, and then I was like, Chinka, what? It's the first time I'd heard of it even, and Quercus Muhlenberg, because Jamie knows, because I was like, what? And I was talking to her and Megan, and I'm like, I've never even heard of this wood, and clearly it's interesting because you're almost like it's the foundation, like you said, of everything you're kind of doing at Raasay, and it's so good.
It's a big part of what we've done, and we've just here in the UK we're just releasing a pack, and it's a peated spirit in 4 different oak species. So it's in these little 5-cell bottles, but we've got our peated spirit in Quercus Muhlenbergi, the Chinkapin, our peated spirit in Quercus Humboldti, which is Andean Colombian oak, our peated spirit in Quercus Petrea, and our peated spirit in Quercus Roba. And I love it because when you put them all together, you're literally just tasting. So it's the same peated spirit, the same age, but in 4 different oak species, and you're just tasting what that oak species brings to the maturation of the whiskey.
How do I get this sample?
Yeah. Sam, I need to talk to you both.
Okay.
Yeah. Sam, can you get on that, please?
I'll try to do my best.
I mean, because it's stuff like that. I'm unlike somebody else in this group. I'm not a chemist. I'm not a science geek, but I find it super fascinating that you can make a product, right? You know, and then you can, depending on what wood the barrel was made of, it ends up tasting not even close to each other, depending on what it is. I find it super fascinating. I mean, that's, you know, when I first started my journey into this very delicious and interesting yet expensive hobby, you know, that it's a thing I found myself doing a lot. Where, oh, this one, they have one in, you know, like the Macallan, you know, double cask, sherry cask, triple cask. Is kind of, okay, well, what's the difference between the all 3 of them? I find that interesting still. So yes, Sam, get on that.
Well, more Sam, please could you get that for us? Thank you very much, sir.
Pretty please.
Now,
Peter, I didn't know you were using the small bottles to drink.
It's just
that's 700 and up.
Yeah.
let me make a quick comment here if I can, and you guys tell me if what I'm saying makes any sense, right? Because I love this chinkapin, you know, heated. So clearly it's got some smokiness to it.
Get out of there.
Oh, clearly it's got some smokiness to it, but it also has vanilla and caramel but it also has almost like an aged cheese undertone plus a peppery aftertaste. Does that make any sense?
Makes a lot of sense, yeah. I mean, again, it's the way I guess with the chinkapin oak and the peated spirit, it just brings all these different elements. So there's a kind of maple syrup element, there's a kind of smoky bacon element.
Smoky bacon, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But what about almost like a fermented cheese? Like,
yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think you get all of these things, and I think if you had a really old, matured Parmigiano Reggiano,
I was just thinking Gouda.
Gouda, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not even the cheese, it's like the rind. It's that hard rind.
Yeah. So it's that, and for me, because like, believe it or not, I worked in the dairy industry, the cheese industry, before I moved into whiskey. So lactis bacillus was a big thing, and calcium lactate crystals. So if you a really old Parmesan, you see these like kind of like books in it. It's like so yeah. I mean, these are the things that are in there. And again, if you go into the chemistry of it, they're absolutely there. So
take a look at the color of this baby.
yeah, it's that's the thing. So
gorgeous.
I think the color in itself tells you how important these casks are to our whole single malt recipe and makeup, because that in itself shows what is coming from the wood. And these casks, I can't talk highly enough of chinkapin oak and, you know, Quercus Muhlenbergi, because it's weird, for so many years that bourbon barrels would have had Quercus alba and Quercus Muhlenbergi, and it just like nobody even thought about it. They were just made, you know, cut oak trees down and made staves and made barrels, and they were just there. And the fact now that you can kind of separate it out into 2 different oak species and taste what that brings, amazing. So
do you know
we're really fortunate.
Do you know when that? I mean, I hadn't, you know, even heard that again before. So, do you have some finger on your pulse of like when the change was kind of made, where they segregated QM and QA?
I think it was all down to all down to the wine guys in the US. So if you think to kind of late 80s, early 90s, and everyone was like, yes, okay, Chardonnay, woo, woo, woo. And then suddenly somebody went, oh my God, this is over oaked. And that's when I think the wine guys went, oh, okay. Literally, okay. And that, I think it was literally the wine guys going, can we have an oak? Let's find an American oak that's not going to kill our wine. And Chinkapin oak was the answer. Quercus Muhlenberger was the answer, and it brings the flavor without killing the wine. And that's, for me, that's the first signs I've seen when it started to get separated out.
Oh, I didn't even know. So you're saying that basically then all these white wine guys started using Chinkapin for their wine barrels?
Yeah.
Ah, interesting. Yeah. Super interesting.
I think it drove that whole backlash of over oaked Chardonnay.
Yep.
Drove we want to use North American white oak. And then I think the lumber guys were like, okay, well, we actually know that there's a difference here, and that's where it started to, and certainly that's how we were able to lean into it.
So cool. Okay.
So
I think.
We've had all these science nerds, so now you're going to get the English nerd for a minute here. What is the difference between Chinkapin with a K and Chinkapin with a QU? Or is there?
So in native North American, Chinkapin with a Q is chestnut. And clearly, being Scottish and wanting to adhere entirely to the Scottish whisky regulations, we don't want any confusion with chestnut and oak. So it's a lot easier to spell it without the Q and say Chinkapin. And we always say Chinkapin oak, not just Chinkapin, for that very reason. Yeah. So basically in Native American, Chinkapin with the Q, and I can't remember the actual Native American word, because Chinkapin with the Q is still a derivation of it, but it means chestnut, and it relates to a chestnut tree, not an oak tree. So it's slightly misleading terminology. So in all honesty, that's why we use the K.
Castanea pumila, maybe.
Yeah, but yeah, possibly. But yeah, if you look into it and you research it, it's actually someone took a Native American word for chestnut and talked about an oak tree. So
looks like it's Algonquin originally.
Right. Okay. There you go.
Jason, I have my own version of the difference between these two. We happen to have two distilleries that we bring the whiskeys that use Chinkapin. The one with the Q is Glenallachie, which is finished in Chinkapin, right? Isle of Raasay with the K is matured from day one. So that's my point of difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I love that distinction as well. The full maturation is really important for me.
I was gonna say, because Chinkapin with a K is an oak, you can fully mature it in the Chinkapin with a K, but if it's the Chinkapin Q, because it's chestnut, you cannot, based on rules.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be really clear that Glenallachie are definitely using oak for a finish. No doubt about that.
Okay.
But Sam's right. I think it's for me, it's the fact that certainly very important for me that we're doing full maturation in Chinkapin oak. It's really very, very different from doing a finish.
What were the four in the sampler platter again? The Chinkapin, Humboldti, Robar, and what was the last one? Just Alba?
Patria.
Oh, Patria. How do you spell Patria?
Patraea.
Oh, okay.
So Quercus Patria is, when everyone talks about European oak, Quercus Patria is the classic European oak. So that's the one that's full of eugenol, that gives the cloves. The eugenol is cloves. Bertrea is very high in that, and that's what everyone thinks about. But Quercus roba is equally as prevalent as Quercus bertrea.
I hadn't heard Patria mentioned before much. Usually it's just QR and the Robar that I've typically heard of.
Yeah. I mean, Quercus roba. So in sherry, Spanish oak is almost predominantly Quercus roba.
Yeah, that's where that usually comes up, I guess. I hear it.
Yeah, but in France, what's fascinating for me in France is that they don't talk about oak species at all. They talk about fine grain and wide grain. So in crude terms, Quercus bertrea is fine grain and Quercus roba is wide grain. But then it depends where it grows. If you go Quercus roba in Russia, it's very, 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 very fine grain. It's because of the temperatures. That's another story. Anyway, we should probably keep going. Sorry, Lizzie.
I was ahead of you guys. I did the cask strength. We haven't gotten there yet, have we?
Not technically, but who's counting?
We can go straight there. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
Can I
As you go straight there.
I just tasted it. Can I make a quick comment? Because it really,
Of course.
I mean, this was really surprising to me, and it took a while to figure it out. First of all, it's got just a small amount of smokiness to it. It's very, very sweet. And it's got hints of vanilla, but what kind of, I was having a hard time finding exactly what it was, but it has a hint of chocolate liqueur. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. So basically, it's the first whiskey we had. So the very first whiskey we had tonight at 46.4. It's exactly that. So it's peated and unpeated, matured in ex-rye, Chinkapin oak, ex-Bordeaux, but it's bottled. It's not reduced, so it's bottled as it's vatted at 61.3%. So this is going back to what we were talking about earlier when Sam asked about how do you decide on bottling strength. This is really easy to decide on bottling strength because it's just straight from the cask. So there's maybe about 80, 90 casks in a vatting. And this is what it's like once it's vatted and bottled without any reduction. So if you go back to the very first whiskey we had tonight and compare it to this, what you're really tasting is the difference between it being reduced and it coming straight from the cask.
It's so good.
So yeah, I mean, it's really just ramps everything up to 11,
And seriously, what about that just like hint of chocolate liqueur?
Yeah. I think that chocolate element is there in the dram in the first whiskey we had. The issue is that when you reduce it down to 46.4, it's in the background. It's really faint. You really have to look for it. But when we do the bottling at cask strength at 61.3, the complexity, the intensity of everything, as I say, is ramped up to 11. And that's why you get it. It's kind of to the fore because of the strength that it's bottled at. And that's one of the things with reduction. Normally when you reduce it, more of those elements come out. But I think one of the things we lose a little bit of in reduction is that chocolate element that you're talking about.
Interesting. Anyway, I got to drink more whiskey. That's it.
Can I bring up one thing, and it's no way directed at you, Glenn, but it's just a pet peeve of mine, and I was hoping you could maybe talk a little bit about that if we kind of since we're at the end and we can get nerdy about chemistry. One of my pet peeves is sort of a lot of times when people talk about peat, Alasdair, and they, to me, conflate the flavor of peat with smoke and use smoke or smoky as a word to describe something that to me is clearly peaty. And, I've
done a little bit of research, and I know there's different phenol groups, like, you know, the main phenols and then the guaiacols and other things that, you know, and creosotes that, you know, you can
Yeah.
clearly more identify when you start getting really nerdy and all that stuff. And just kind of curious if you could maybe talk a little about that and what you would expect out of Raasay, you know, as opposed to the other spirits.
So I guess the biggest thing from our point of view in peat is that we use Highland peat. So our barley is malted with Highland peat, not Isle peat. And I think particularly when you're getting into, as you said, the taste, the two main phenolic compounds that peat brings, the iodine medicinal elements are not in the peat that we use for peating Raasay, and that confuses a lot of people, I think, because people are, and understandably so. If you use Isle peat, you know, so when they cut the peat on Isle, it's relatively low lying, it's relatively coastal, it's very oily, and you get more of those, not the furols, you get more of those fusel elements in the peat, which is more of the iodine TCP elements of it.
TCP, yeah.
But that's not what you have in Raasay. We don't have that. So in lay terms, I would say we are more kind of a wood smoke or a barbecue smoke element in our peat. But then going back to the oak and the volatile phenols from the degradation of lignin, those phenols are very different again. They're leaning again more on that kind of, it's not even wood smoke, it's more of a heather smoke, it's more of a herbaceous, and as you say, smoke's not the right word. It's just like, but it's trying to verbalize it in the way that people would understand it. So when you see smoky bacon, you know, that kind of meaty, sulfury smoke, that's probably in Raasay, but not the iodine medicinal trichloral. You know, so it's not that. So yeah, I think it's really, really difficult when you get into phenolics to verbalize it. It's very, very difficult, and I think that's why I like to talk about degradation of lignins and volatile phenols, because then you're not talking about peat smoke, you're not talking about peat, but it's an incredibly crucial part of the maturation of whiskey that you get these volatile phenols from the oak. So you can put a completely unpeated spirit into an oak cask, and in time you will get phenolic compounds from the oak.
Really? So that explains some of these non-peated whiskeys I've had over the years, where maybe if they had some really, you know, aged cask or something, people are like, why am I tasting peat in this?
It's not peat. It's not peat. It's phenolics. It's the phenolic compounds, but it's phenolics from oak.
And that's peat.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I recognize the fact that we put a huge amount of effort into buying 52 parts per million phenolic compound peated malted barley, only to know that in time that's going to disappear. It's just going to degrade. So we then put a lot of time into the specifications of our casks to create phenolic, volatile compounds from the oak, so that in maturation we will get oak volatile phenols coming back. So I'm not sure everyone's got that understanding, to be perfectly honest with you, but unpeated whiskey in a cask that has had a long air drying and high toast will have phenolic compounds in it.
Crazy. Awesome.
Yeah, hope that helps.
To To my point, as I was saying, Glenn, we all learned something new today. I think I learned something new today about peat, and I love peated scotches. So that's awesome.
Well, thank you so much, guys. This was like incredibly informative, really, really fun. And I definitely will be back.
Yeah.
So
Don't go away yet.
anyway, well, it's bedtime, so we gotta.
You got to take
Okay.
a photo though
So
first.
before you go,
Yeah.
I'd like to invite anyone who's not on camera to join us on camera as we get to our last dram of the night. Everybody raise a glass. Alasdair,
Here we go.
thank you so much for staying up stupid late for us.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Sam, thank you once again for bringing us someone fabulous and whiskey that is to absolutely die for.
Thank you. This was absolutely a treat. It was a pleasure.
Okay, everybody smile for the camera.
Right.
Pleasure.
3.
I think that I got it.
And then Alasdair, I'm going to be there for Speyside Whiskey Festival. How far away are you from Speyside? Like if I have a car and I can take a boat?
Yeah. Oh yeah, far
It's 2
enough. So
hours.
Speyside. Yeah, you're probably about a 3-hour, 3.5-hour drive, and then a 25
Oh, that's
minute ferry.
nothing. I live in Texas. It takes 3 hours just to get to another city here.
Well, cool. Come and see us.
All
Exciting.
right. Yeah, I'll be there April 27th to like May 10th. So I've got some time to go.
Oh, wow.
explore.
It's a long trip, Lizzie. That's awesome.
Yeah, everybody told me to stay at least 10 days.
Yep.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if
And
you
I
come
have
to
to find my clan, the McDaniels. I have been looking for them for years. So I'm going to walk in every bar and ask if there's a McDaniel in the room.
That's good. Oh, boy. You're going to have fun.
What? I'm a McDonald's.
They're
So I can't help
McDaniels who
you.
aren't, but you know.
From McDonald, that's Isla, right? Alasdair?
Yeah, well, Lewis actually, my other great grandfather was Alan MacDonald, and he was from Port Voller, which is in Point on Lewis, so not that far from Raasay.
Yeah, so I've done some research. I have my coat of arms and everything pulled up. So hopefully it's not that big a country. I got to be able to find at least one driving around for 10 days.
Yeah, yeah. If you're in Glasgow, go to the Park Bar. You'll definitely find a McDaniel's there.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's all of the. It's kind of like a mecca for everyone from the Highlands and Islands. Everybody goes to the Park Bar in Glasgow.
Okay, well, my grandfather told me they all ran to Ireland because they got their asses kicked by King Edward when they fought with William Wallace and Robert the Bruce. So he said,
yeah, that's why most people left Scotland. Yeah.
By the way, is it one ferry or 2 ferries from Speyside to get to you, Alasdair?
It's just one. So you can drive all the way to. So there's a bridge to Skye.
Oh, the bridge, right?
Okay.
I forgot about the bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Then 1 ferry.
So we are an island off an island, but there is a bridge to Skye. So
yeah, all right, cool.
yeah, over the seas to Skye is a bridge now.
And can you explain the saltwater briny taste? The Chemie in me has been wanting to hit Souter up for an explanation, but I never. He's always busy teaching us.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So if you get into the chemistry of it, that salty element actually comes from the barley. So it's really weird. If you actually do all of the analysis just purely based on chemistry, the only place that you can actually get salt, as in sodium chloride, is from the barley itself. However, as I said earlier, we're not analog beings, and that's not how our palates work. So for me, it's a combination of, if you have a combination of different chemicals of different flavors, when we taste it, that's for me when you can get these different elements. And the one cask in particular that I get it from is when we've got our peated barley in the ex-Bordeaux cask. You get a really salty, briny element from it. But scientifically,
Mhm.
Those notes can only come from the grain itself.
Huh. And when you say the grain itself, again, is it something that's unlocked in a chemical reaction that basically happens? Because
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
it's my understanding is it's the sodium element of it that comes from the barley.
Hmm.
But then you've got all these other things going on, and it's like
Interesting.
for me,
Yeah,
the
'cause,
peated spirit.
everyone's favorite Islas, they talk about, you know, they taste the sea in it from aging, and I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, but all of them are aged in the Highlands, so you're not getting anything from the
Well,
aging process.
well, I'm very proud to say that all of our spirit is matured on Raasay.
Hmm.
We have our own warehouses, never leaves the island. But then again, does maturing it on an island, yeah,
Well,
it's
yeah.
maritime. Is it gonna? So what we did, I had a conversation with a journalist actually, and he was talking about, oh, you're gonna have this kind of long-term maritime element to your whiskey because you're maturing it all. And I was thinking about something, well, if we do, it's going to take so long for that to happen. But I actually got some Manzanilla casks. So Manzanilla obviously comes from the coastal region of the Cherry Triangle and San de Luca rather than Jerez. And it's got a really, really salty element to it. So we matured our spirit in Manzanilla casks. And right enough, we got this really dry, salty element to the spirit. But then I actually went to Jerez and went out to San de Luca, and I was talking to them, and they went, well, actually, do you know what? It's not the fact that we're next to the sea. It's all down to the floor. So Manzanilla is a biological sherry, so it's not oxidized. So it has a layer of floor of yeast. And if you take the floor and you analyze it, there's 4 different types of Saccharomyces cerevisiae in the floor, 4 types of yeast. And it's the same, exactly the same 4 Saccharomyces cerevisiae that you get in Jerez, but in different proportions. And what happens is it's actually the sea air. The different yeasts are in different proportions because of the salinity of the sea air. And it's actually the different level of yeast that adds the saltiness to the Manzanilla. So anyway, it's always more complex than you think. So.
On that note, one thing you haven't mentioned actually is the aging on Raasay in terms of warehousing and how you age the casks, dunnage, palletized, racked, etc.
So we've got two warehouses currently on Raasay. They're both 1,000-meter square meters warehouses, but one is palletized and one is dunnage.
And
they're kind of semi-detached.
And what were you, what do you expect? Why did you do that? What were you expecting? And the difference, what do you put in one versus the other?
So everything that we're going to bottle prior to 7 years old is in the dunnage. In the palletized, generally speaking. But everything that's going to be aged for a longer period of time is in the dunnage. Because the issue with palletization is that cask ends can dry out, and that's not ideal for long-term maturation. Whereas in the dunnage, everything's on its side. We've got earth floors. The humidity's probably in better control in the dunnage than it is in the palletized warehouse. So it's really about utilization of space and the amount of time that you want to hold the cask there. So the dunnage is long-term maturation and palletized is shorter-term maturation.
Is there anything advantageous to palletization for flavor, or is it purely maybe more economics of space?
It's utilization of space. There's nothing disadvantageous to maturing and palletized other than the cask ends drying out, which is an obvious concern. We have done the groundworks to do a third warehouse, and it's all going to be racked. So racking is that kind of happy intermedium between palletized and dunnage. So everything's on its side, but there's a better utilization of space than dunnage.
Interesting.
But I love the dunnage warehouse. It's my favorite place on Raasay.
Dunnage warehouses with the mold and the look and the feel and the smell. Like there's nothing like walking.
There's something about it when you walk in, and the humidity as well. And
yeah,
we've got quite heavily insulated panels. So we've got like 90 mil Kingspan panels on the building. So we've really gone for minimum fluctuation in temperature, purposefully. I mean, I know there's two schools of thought on maturation. One is you need temperature fluctuation because you get the kind of expansion and contraction of the roll. But my preference is stability, so that's what we've gone for.
That's always been a question I had, especially when I look at climates where Taiwan, India, Israel, where it's super high variation. And I'm just like, I understand that left to your devices, that's what's going to happen. But why don't you, climate control, at least to some extent, what's going on, especially when your angel share is so huge. And after 3 years, you're using double digits of your product and then the cask is dry. Like I never quite understood. They're just trying to stay true to nature or something, or have you ever talked to these guys?
I don't know. I mean, for us, it was like our dunnage warehouse the earth floor is. I mean, it's amazing the difference having that earth floor makes. It's really, from a humidity point of view. But then we went for insulation, and like we don't have massive fluctuations in temperature. It's like at absolute lowest maybe -2, and absolute highest maybe 22. But by insulating the panels, we're maybe kind of 17 degrees to, we're probably pretty much 17 degrees all the time.
If anybody hasn't voted on the poll yet, I'm going to close it in a couple of seconds here. So get on it.
I voted, but I'm biased.
You're allowed to be biased.
By the way, it's what, 4 a.m. there now, your time, or 3?
Yeah, it's 3 minutes past.
That's why I'm trying to get the poll done.
I was just gonna say, like, thank you for being crazy and waking up early or staying up late. I'm not sure which for us.
Well, I know I went to sleep and got up, and then I'm going to go back to sleep. It's not a problem. But do you know what? It's worth it. I just love talking to people about Raasay.
Not to hold you for too long.
All right. Well, this has been one of the best tastings I've been to. I have been geeking out the whole time, Alasdair. So thank you. The chemie in me is so happy.
Yeah, we like the whole nerdy learning thing. So this has been super awesome. Would you like to take a guess at what the favorite pour of the night was?
Who's gonna guess?
You.
That's for you, Alasdair.
Oh, Duncana.
And you would be correct.
Woo!
So all of the scotches got a vote.
Yeah.
Duncana got 4. Ex-Bordeaux, ex-Rye, unpeateds both got 3, and everything else got 2 votes.
By the way, I'm just going to point out that the gin was like a misdirect, and people clearly follow directions because it said, "What was your favorite whiskey of the night?" Not sure.
If you look at it says favorite of the night. I did not put whiskey in the title.
So, but look at the question.
I guess I'm surprised that because normally the peated Chinkapin really ranks up there, so that's really interesting. That's really interesting.
I voted for the cast strength just because and I didn't actually get the boards tonight, but I remembered from Saturday, and what most impressed me about it was for a cast strength. And actually, this is why I ended up finally buying bottles from Charlie and Drammers, because I hadn't gotten any until I did the tasting, and I was just like, how incredibly balanced it was. And you could taste, like, obviously the first whiskey, but just like you said, turned up to 11, but it doesn't burn. It doesn't blow you away. It's just so well done. And I was just like, this is somebody who knows what they're doing. I mean,
and the rest of the group knows. I always say, the bourbon drinkers are generally what I call proof horse, right? They can't get it as strong enough, and I've never been chasing that. but I agree wholeheartedly with Benoit. This, I mean, if you didn't tell me this was cast strength, I wouldn't think that this was cast strength.
Yep.
I mean,
At 61% too, not like 55%, 61%.
Exactly. Yeah. This is not, you know, I don't think of this as a flamethrower, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Guys, I really, really appreciate that because, you know, I think that's it. If we can produce a drinkable whiskey regardless of the strength, I'm a happy person.
right.
Yeah.
And I can't say this enough. I mean, the problem is every time Sam brings a whiskey to table, we know it's going to be good.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's your first stamp of approval, right? Sam sets the bar, and I will say you surpassed it. I mean, this was some great whiskey. So
Thanks,
Thank you
Henry.
very much.
Is the non-peated whiskey qualified too, or just?
I mean, you know, you know my preference for peat, but this is peat is not a requirement for me. It just has to be delicious. I just tend to like peated whiskeys over non-peated whiskeys in general. But no, this was really good.
Well, and going with Henrik is the greatest thing about this tasting is I think it reminded me is I don't feel like if I'm explaining your distillery to someone else that I have to preface with it's young, but
Mhm.
and
Exactly. Yep.
because there are a lot of places that are doing
Yes.
right now, and we love them because we can taste what they're going to be and see what they're doing. You're already there. You're already doing a beautiful, elegant, absolutely drinkable spirit. I don't feel like I have to preface it or apologize for it or explain it. It's just here, drink this, shut up.
No,
Yeah, and I liked all of them. I never like all of them.
Yep. No, I mean, like age never even kind of came up. And if you think about it, like it's, you know, it just goes to show. And I mean, this is why I really appreciate Alasdair. It goes to show the care and attention to detail and the understanding of the process you clearly have, because all the things you said, you went out to create an elegant spirit. And you did, even though it's young, which everyone associates with the exact opposite, sort of like harsh flamethrower or whatever terms you want to use. But the stuff you describe and you know what you're doing with like the fermentation using the Chinkapin oak and all these, you know, aspects that you basically put into it, it's like, you know, 2 + 2 + 2 + 2, and you know, you get the result, but it's even greater than, you know, what you thought, like just what you've been able to do. And it's awesome. It's awesome. So thank you.
No, thank you.
This has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
Can you tell us a little bit about the near future?
Yeah.
What?
So hopefully a lot more of the same. You know, you're going to see the Dram, you're going to see Dunkana, but we are doing other things. There are some other special releases to come. As I say, we've been doing different things with yeast. There might be, hopefully at some point, we'll release a champagne yeast bottling, and then there's some different casks that are coming as well. As I said, we're doing this pack of 4 different oak species, which I'm really excited about, and you know, Sam, I sincerely hope that makes it out to the States, that we will be able to do more in the future.
Don't forget your
also
3.5-week fermentation project that, you know, we'd probably love to try.
Yeah, I mean, there's different barley varieties. There's Raasay barley. There's lots of different things that will over time come to light. But generally speaking, very much more of the same. And longer term, our project to build a second distillery in Campbelltown is very much.
Right. Yeah. Could you talk a bit about that and what prompted that?
Yeah. So we bought a farm in Macrahanish, just outside Campbelltown. We bought the farm back in December 2021. So we've grown barley there for 4 years now. So all of that has pretty much been distilled at Raasay. So we've got our own dairy farm barley. It's all grown regeneratively. We literally just drilled this week at the farm for our 4th year, and we're growing some beer barley down there this year. But we're going to build a distillery there. Hopefully, I mean, it's, as you probably know, it's kind of difficult times in the industry at the minute. So it's all about timing as to when we start building the next distillery. So I think in reality, March, April next year, 2026, we'll probably break ground. So hopefully we'll be distilling by 2030 at the latest. Well, we might even have whiskey by 2030, actually. We'll be distilling by 2027. Yeah, so 2030 we might have some Campbelltown single malt, and it's the idea is it's going to be different but complementary to Raasay. So a lot of the thought processes that I've talked about tonight, I've designed into the process design of Machrihanish, but very much trying to create an oily, briny, nutty spirit. So trying to create a Campbelltown spirit and leaning more on sherry kind of maturation. So Spanish oak, Quercus roba, Oloroso, that kind of element. So that's an ongoing project. It's taken quite a lot of my time recently to
a bit more of a traditional sherry bomb type whiskey.
Yeah. I mean, I think Raasay is very much a contemporary distillery, Hebridean but contemporary, and I think we can't really build a new distillery in Campbelltown without actually paying reverence to the Campbelltown style.
And expanding out the region, so it won't collapse again.
There you go. Yeah.
Nice.
Lizzie, before you go, are you gonna come to Galaxy Whiskey Gala?
Yep.
In Austin?
I
I'll
will
see you
be
there.
there. I'm
stop
super
by our
excited.
tables.
I'm doing interviews for the founders and some other stuff, and getting data for my book. So
Beautiful. I'm gonna be there, so looking forward to see you in
oh,
person.
great! I'll look a lot better than this.
You look great.
I hear
Oh,
a
yeah,
dress
fine
is
all together,
required.
my dear.
I'm always showing up for your guys' stuff in tank tops and a headband. I'll actually have a dress on Saturday.
The chemistry has already started, so.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of chemistry, I got maybe one more question if you have enough time, Alasdair.
Yeah.
Okay. So this has been something I've been wondering about lately. I think Jamie's probably already heard this, and I'm very curious your thoughts on this. It came up in one of our whiskey club tastings. I got some interesting answers, and it's the following, which can you speak to? There's a thing I've noticed, and other people have noticed too. You drink a whiskey, let's just say typically a Scotch or a bourbon or anything, and sometimes it drinks hot. And you ask people, what's the ABV of this? They're like, this is like 60%, 65%. And then, like it's actually not, it's lower. Or more what I prefer nowadays is you drink something and you're like, oh, doesn't, burn, right? And like, what do you think the ABV on it? And like, oh, this is like, 50%, 52%, but it's actually a 63% whiskey, right? And so there's that aspect of alcohol burn. And what I'm trying to narrow down and understand, and I'm curious if you have any experience thoughts with this, is just like, is there a single identifiable factor that kind of causes that? Is it like longer fermentation? Is it lower barrel entry proof? Or is it a multivariate problem that has no easy answer and you can't put your finger on it and it could be any number of things?
Yeah, no, yeah. So what's interesting tonight, and I guess very pleasing for me is when we're talking about the last whiskey, the cask strength, and I think most of you said that you wouldn't have picked it out as a cask strength whiskey, you wouldn't have picked it out at 61% and all this. So that's really pleasing for me, because I think that element of, the word I always use is elegance, and it doesn't mean anything, but for me it's just drinkable, right? So like, ultimately my life goal is to produce whiskey that's drinkable and people enjoy, and that's what I want to do. And so when people talk about that burn, and then, you know, if it's one of our whiskies and people are talking about being hot or there's a burn, I'm never happy with that description. It's the honest answer. Never happy. So, but it's a really hard thing to actually define what that is. So, sometimes, you know, so a lot of our whiskies, you know, purposely have spice. We talked a lot about black pepper and spice, and sometimes that is what drives heat. You know, so the spicier the whiskey, the more heat that you tend to get. But I do think, for me, it's a kind of refinement element. And when I was talking about using casks with high char and having lower pH and more catalytic reaction with copper and all, these elements for me are really important. So it's interesting that, you know, when we were starting out and I was going, oh, we're doing a high toast and a high char, everyone told me you're wrong. That's not, you don't want to do that. You want a maximum of a medium toast, and you don't want a high. And it's like, no, we do want that for what we are trying to make, you know. So I think if there's two ways of looking at it, I guess. So time fixes everything. Okay. But generally speaking, time fixes everything to a point. But the whole thing about efficiencies. So, you know, if we were a 200-year-old distillery, if we were part of a multinational company, we would be looking at our cost base, and we'd be trying to produce a litre of alcohol for as cheap as we possibly can, for the right reasons, for all the right reasons. And then we would be going, well, in actual fact, we need to put it into a refill cask, because that's the cheapest option of oak that we can use. And that's all good, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But then you have to wait. You probably have to wait 15 years to have something that's not hot and is drinkable. Okay. So time fixes that. The issue then is if you get to like 30, 40 years old, you have too much oak influence. It's over oaked and you go the other way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, you need to define before you start what it is you want to make. And I think if you do that, you can avoid that hot burn element. That would be my view on things. But I'm not saying there's any, I don't know that you could say a longer fermentation or whatever, but I just know that if you sat down with a blank sheet of paper, which I had the luxury of doing, and not many people have that luxury of being given a blank sheet of paper and going, design something, you can hopefully avoid that heat and that burn. That would be my view on it. But as to what actually specifically causes it, I think you'd have to deconstruct it. You'd have to take that whiskey and you'd have to break it down. You'd have to go, right, well, how is this made and what cask has it been in? And like, you'd have to look at all of that. And then I think very quickly you would get to the bottom of why the burn's there. But it's not fair to say that it's down to alcohol strength. It's not fair to say that.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and I suspect it's a multivariate problem that's not easily pinned downable. Unfortunately, because honestly, I find myself gravitating nowadays, while I like cask strength and the ability to water it down, I find myself going, yeah, if it's burning too much, I'm just like, no. And I used to drink that stuff like water all the time, but I'm getting older and I'm like, I don't like it. What's that?
This is 80.3%.
Say what?
This is a wheat whiskey, 80.3%. It's 160 proof.
Okay, I've never even seen that.
Is that Garrison Brothers?
No, this is Lone Elm.
Oh,
painful.
So this is Lone Elm. This is a Texas wheat whiskey, and I swear there are budget 40% whiskeys that burn more than this one. And so to your point is, burn can come from your proof, but it's not the proof itself. It's what because of the proof, the alcohol has nothing to bind with. And therefore now the only thing that you're getting is water and alcohol. And you're not getting all the congeners and esters and everything else bound up in a more complex alcohol build. And then your other thing's going to be, are you very column stilled, or are you getting all the oils? Because the oils give your alcohol something to bind to and smooth it out and do that. And like we're saying, there's 5-6 different things I can think offhand that can cause burn. And depending on which one of the levers you pull or combination, you can make the burniest whiskey ever, or the smoothest whiskey. And drinking this one reminds me of like if you drank candle wax, because it's hot, it's warm, but like it's warm and coating. Like you can feel it go all the way
So
down
it has a
your
high
body.
viscosity. It has a high viscosity.
Yeah, it is very viscous. It is oily.
You know, that's a huge thing that I think is totally missed in whiskey is mouthfeel.
I was going to just ask
how many people talk about mouthfeel and viscosity? I mean,
I always ask about it.
I do, because that's like, that's why I like whiskey. I don't like because my nickname is the sober Somm. I don't actually let it go down the back of my throat. I've learned to taste it so it hits just the right spot. So it's all mouthfeel for me because I don't swallow it.
It's so important. I think absolutely, and that's a lot of what we do in Raasay is about trying to create mouthfeel.
Because that's the other thing. There's a huge thing I was wondering about viscosity. There was I don't know if you ever heard of a guy named Cammy Newton, but he had some interesting sort of like detailed blog posts about viscosity and actually the links of tannins to viscosities and how tannins, like you were saying, Jason, basically bind to certain compounds. And that's changes the mouthfeel of the spirit as you're basically drinking it, depending. And I'm finding myself more and more nowadays focusing on finding whiskeys that have a more rounded, softer, oilier coating mouthfeel. I just love that, aspect rather than just kind of something that's very light and sort of just evaporates off your tongue.
It's why bourbon pairs so badly with spicy food, but Irish whiskey pairs so well.
Yeah.
If you do bourbon, all of that new oak tannin is just going to just everything part of your mouth is going to go on fire.
Right.
And it's really for us the cooling jackets on the washback. So the higher fermentation temperatures is amazing. The difference in viscosity and mouthfeel just by letting it ferment at a higher temperature.
Okay, interesting. So the higher fermentation temperature gives you that better mouthfeel.
Yeah, you get more fusel oils, you get more higher alcohols, and you get more viscosity in.
Okay.
You've got to manage to distill that over, obviously, but you can create the viscosity in fermentation.
So Alasdair, one of my distilleries I'm working with launching theirs, they put a pound of pecans in every barrel of their bourbon, and it gave it that oily mouthfeel.
Yeah.
And it's delicious. That sour, I forgot I was supposed to bail you a taste of it. I've blind tasted it with a bunch of people and they were like, wow, it's like a Scotchy bourbon.
There you go.
Because I'm not a bourbon fan. I don't like it. I think it's the mouthfeels on most bourbons don't, I'm an Irish Scotch girl or American single malt girl. So
yeah, I like bourbon. I'm a bourbon rye guy.
Cool. Yeah. Lizzie was like, I'm leaving 15 minutes ago.
I wonder.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the time.
Yep.
4:30 in the morning. Is that okay? I don't
we could ask you nerdy questions for hours. I don't want to keep you up till you have to go to work again and miss getting another nap in.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you so much, Alasdair, for spending the evening with us. Thank you, Sam. And this will be posted soon. So if you guys feel like you need to revisit the nerdiness, it'll be available. Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks so much, Alasdair.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
See you in a month, Alasdair. I'm gonna make
Yeah.